Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this Team Developer Live webinar, Preparing Applications for .NET. I'm your host, Martin Tilz, and I'm going to guide you through this webinar today. Our speaker will be Helmut Reimann, and we will be talking about preparing applications for .NET. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please post your questions into the WebEx Q&A tool, and we will answer them at the end. This webinar is part of a two-webinar series on moving applications to .NET. Today we are doing the first step, preparing existing applications for .NET, where you will learn what steps you have to do before you can move your applications to .NET. And the second webinar, which will be announced later towards the end of July, will be moving existing applications to .NET, where we really take an application and move it to .NET then. This is your speaker today. Helmut Reimann is an experienced TD professional, works for this company more than 10 years, and has lots of team developer and team developer.net experience. And with this, I'd like to give control over to Helmut for presenting this webinar. I'm changing WebEx control here to Helmut. Okay, you should be able to share your desktop now.
Takes a second, so here we go.
Yes, I can read your email.
Okay. Excuse me. Here we go. Many thanks, Martin, for the introduction. So today I want to give you a first overview about how to migrate your existing application, existing maybe very old applications, old-fashioned applications, first of all to Team Developer 6.1 Win32. And the second part, end of July, will be to get the first application running on the .NET framework. So at this point, we have to talk about how to get your old source codes, maybe from Team Developer 1.1.2 into Team Developer 6.1, and run them successfully on Win32 deployment areas. So today I want to give you an overview about migrating application to TD 6.1 Win32. So we have to talk today about Unicode. We have to talk about replacements for quick graph, quick objects like grid, trees, and tabs. And we have to talk about how to handle ActiveX controls, because maybe a lot of you are using ActiveX controls in your application and you want to reuse them on .NET. We have to talk about the data type binary, because it was introduced in Team Developer 5X to split really text and character-based information and data from binary data. We have to look into replacements of unsupported API functions inside Team Developer. We have to talk about third-party DLLs, which are used inside your applications, like Win API calls, or if you have some third-party DLLs. And of course, we have to talk, are my sources ready to compile for .NET? Because .NET is a little bit different to Win32, and a few things are not supported in the .NET framework, and you have to learn how to replace them. So for the migration, first of all, we have two major questions. The first one is where I am. That means, for example, my sources or your sources are based on Team Developer 1.1.2 or maybe 4.2. And maybe a few of you are running Team Developer sources on 5X versions, so they are really Unicode ready, and you don't have to think about Unicode. But we want to start with very early versions of source code. That means we have to transfer the source code, we have to migrate the source code into the Unicode environment of Team Developer. And then we have to talk in the first step how to compile and how to use your source code in Team Developer 6.1 to compile this for Win32. The red circles are for the next session, end of July, talking how to compile your application to WPF desktop applications based on the .NET framework, or how to run your applications inside the WPF environment inside the browser. Let's start talking about a project. I saw a lot of applications and sources in the field, and let's start talking about a bad project plan. That means, for example, you have very, very old source codes like on Team Developer 3 or Team Developer 1.1.2 or maybe 16-bit sources, and you want to run them on the latest version of Team Developer 6.1, and maybe you want to provide them as a .NET application. At this point, you have to think about a lot of things. First of all, maybe your application should look very modern. That means you want to use the latest versions of our controls, like an outline list container, like tree control. You want to use the newest tab technology with different skinnings and so on. It must be .NET conform because your source and your application should run on the .NET framework, independent from the team developer deployment. You want to create a new user interface. And Unicode, first of all, is not needed because maybe your application is only running in Italy or in Spain or somewhere else, in a local area. That means you don't need Unicode at this point because you're running only inside .NET and inside a special code page inside your language areas. That means at this point, Unicode is not needed. But team developer and .NET is based on Unicode, and you have to think about it. There's no way around. And the next step is more marketing and business thing. So the .NET application is for around 908 euros investment. That means, for example, you have to buy the add-on for team developer.net, and you should compile to .NET. So that is, first of all, is okay because it's really in .NET compiler, and you can change the compile options to .NET. But in the background, there's a totally different way to talk to the operating system and to use the .NET framework, because team developer for .NET is not using the deployment. And later on, I want to show you the difference between both build targets. So it's not a good idea to say, maybe our normal release cycle is about 6 months. I want to add new features. I want to use new functions. I want to create a new user interface. And on top, I want to ship this new release on the .NET platform. So think about it. Maybe a good project could be to start with different steps. That means, for example, you start migrating first your existing source code into the Unicode environment and do the first step of modernization. That means maybe to replace some ActiveX controls with built-in controls like a grid control or a special ActiveX for a calendar control. And you can do the first modernization work like changing the skinning to make a Battleship Gray application looking much better and much more modern. The next step could be that you look into the .NET environment to get your sources.NET ready. That means maybe you have a second modernization path to use outline list container to replace menus with a totally different way to navigate through your application. You can implement now .NET assemblies. So on Win32, you are able to use .NET framework parts. You can include them directly into Win32 sources, and you can compile directly your sources with dependency to .NET assemblies without using .NET compiler. So this gives you the possibility to replace Win32 Win API calls into .NET assemblies. At this point, needed code changes must be done. Like you want to replace a special quick objects, you have to replace the splitter technology from the table window, and you have to use the new splitter technologies inside Team Developer 6.1. And after a while, maybe after running several times the upgrade report, you will be able to compile first time your application to .NET. So this is really a release cycle. That means maybe you need 2 or 3 steps to get the applications ready for .NET. And you have to plan this very carefully because maybe the first time, if you're really native on CEL language item, that means using only the team developer language, it must be, or it is pretty simple to compile to .NET. But mostly you're using third-party products, you're using some DLLs from outside, from different vendors, and then you have to think about Unicode ready, to be Unicode ready, to do several other things. So we found in the market 2 reasons for migration. The first one is software maintenance. That means mostly for maintenance for dead applications. So you have to support of actually operating system and support the versions of TD. So your client changes after a while different computers. They want to use the latest operating systems like Windows 7 or in future Windows 8. And this old application must be certified to run on this new operating system with certified versions of Team Developer and supported versions of Team Developer. So you have to fulfill maintenance agreements and contracts. The target for this part of project is it must be fast, it must be cheap. And maybe we fixed a few things inside the environment of Team Developer. That means inside the deployment, inside the IDE, and you want to provide these fixes to your customer. At this point, you have to compile with the latest version of Team Developer, and you have to replace the deployment, and then you can run all the fixes and all the changes on the new operating system and on supported versions of Team Developer. At this point, it's a never change a winning team. You don't want to do so much with the existing source, only to survive for the next release or to if the application will be replaced by another one. The second plan is new versions, like living applications. So you want to give these applications and you want to provide this application for new platforms. You want to use new user interfaces. You add new functionality inside your sources to provide new technologies to the customer. Maybe you want to provide some web service that someone can connect from outside to the business logic of the application and so on. So it's really a living application. So your customer, your end user has special needs and they want to use really the latest technology. So Team Developer can do both. You can use only Team Developer for software maintenance, and of course, a lot of customers are using Team Developer to create new applications and to plan to migrate applications to the latest technology. The migration project itself, with Win32, you have only to do limited changes. It's similar to release changes in the past, like installing the latest version of Team Developer, load the sources into the Team Developer compiler, and the job is done. But depending on the size of the application, it could be that you need more than a few days or weeks to get the application to Team Developer for .NET or Team Developer Win32 because of Unicode work, and you have to replace maybe some DLLs or some third-party products which are no longer supported for Unicode. So it depends on the modernization work. So with Team Developer 5.1, 5.2, we introduced skinning. That means you can change the look and feel, the skinning, the colors, the base colors of your application by changing the skinning during compile time or with an API. So it's pretty simple process. So at this point, there's nothing to do for coding. Maybe you want to provide a dialog to change the skinning on the fly, but it's really done in a few minutes. And maybe you want to use now the new outline look and feel like in Outlook. So at this point, you can reuse your existing dialogues and forms, but you can replace a dialog or a menu for different dialogues and so on by using a tree. And if you click on the tree, you want to display some forms, and these forms maybe are existing forms, but now they are bound to a tab page. So you bring a tab page in front, and you have a lot of possibilities to switch between different, let's say, dialogues and forms and to display different data. Also, you can use named toolbars and to navigate inside your application. That means the named toolbars replaces maybe some buttons on different dialogues and forms. And this named toolbars are bound directly to MDI windows or to forms. And if you maybe open a special form, you get a named toolbar, and you can directly use this toolbar to save, store, or to delete something. So, and if you delete this form, if you close the form, the named toolbar will disappear. But the next step is modernization of business graphics, of your business charts. So in the past, we used bits per second and as a third-party product to display and to create business charts. But now we replace this old-fashioned tool with a new one, and you don't have to code something because we can read all the properties which are set for this quick graph, the chart control itself, and we can read them, and we can use this existing properties to display your existing chart in a new, much more modern way. Tab grid, splitter master, and data export are now inside Win32 for Team Developer 6.1. So you have to talk about tab control. You have to replace maybe quick tabs to get the latest tab technology inside Team Developer. So we provide some tools to do it in an automated way. The same for the grid. It's not possible to run the table window on .NET. So at this point, we replace the table window with a grid, and you have much more possibilities like grouping and sorting inside a grid. And you have, for example, data export to create Excel sheets, XML documents, or text documents directly out of the grid without using Office automation. So it's really a native creation of like an XML document or an Excel document. And Splittermeister is our new technology to provide splitting technologies inside grids. Later on, I want to show a little bit more. And the next step, Unicode, database migration. This is a point for you. So maybe your database is already running on Unicode, then it's fine. You don't have to migrate your application or your database to Unicode because our client supports ANSI and Unicode. That means, for example, if your data is based on ANSI data for the characters and for strings and so on, then our client takes care about it and translates it into Unicode. And if you save something from the client into the database, then the application will get all the information as a Unicode string, and our client, our environment, converts this Unicode string based on the local code page into ANSI and saves it into the database. And the big point is Win API. This was really a big challenge for us in the past because a lot of people are using Win API in their applications. At this point, Win API must be replaced normally to the Unicode version of the Win API. And we had a lot of problems in the past because a lot of people are using Win API not really in a central place like in a special functional class. They have a lot of calls inside functions, local functions, inside messages, and so on. So very often they didn't find all the Win API calls. And at this point, maybe an application could be compiled without any problem, but during runtime, they run into crashes, run into really bad situations because they missed maybe one or two calls, and after a while, someone clicked on a special button, fired a special method, and the application stopped working. The same for external DLLs. So sometimes they use very old DLLs. They found it on the web, very nice DLLs, nice features, and so on. And after a while, they found out that it's not working in the Win32 environment for Unicode. At this point, we had a lot of problems to explain that they have to look into this environment and have to find out if they can get one of the Unicode versions of these APIs. But later on, you will see we have a replacement for that. Let's start. How can I get my sources to TD 6.1? So if you want to migrate application source codes of applications into Team Developer 6.1 or 6.0, then it makes sense to use migration wizard inside the Team Developer environment. You have two possibilities to look in or to migrate your applications into the latest version of Team Developer. That means recurse through include. That means you define a special application, and the migration wizard looks into the source code and try to find out which APLs are included, which APDs are included, and so on, and converts only these APLs and APDs into the latest version of Team Developer. Or you can use quick migrate. That means you have a special environment, like a special directory with all your sources, and you can create a new target directory. And this migration tool will convert this files file by file into the new environment. And you will get informations like if the special file couldn't be converted because of a bug inside the source code or something else. So at this point, you have to look into the during migration, you get some information about issues during the migration, but mostly the migration runs very well. And the migration wizard itself includes new outline sections, like for named toolbars or for resources into the environment. The good point is to save all your sources as a text. That means if you have your sources, APLs, APDs, and APPs as a text format, like an APT, then it makes it pretty simple if something happens in your sources. For example, I found in the field during a project with a customer that they have mixed up some sources, like they had sources in 4.2, some sources on 3, and one was in 1.1.2, and a few source codes are very old source codes based on 1999, like in 16-bit. So at this point, they run into an issue because the very, very old source code includes some, very, let's say, commands or source code sections. We are not able to convert them at this point. So at this point, the conversion failed. If they are in the text mode, you can open them in a normal text editor and you can edit them. You can comment them out and you can try it again. And then you can look into the source code, what's going wrong inside Team Developer 6.1 IDE, and you can fix it. So, for example, if you have a very old DDE stuff inside, and which was working very well in the past, but with the new operating systems, with the new environment, you run into issues. So the migration wizard finds this one, and you can comment them out before you get in trouble. And the next very important point is remember your reports. So the good point is to open them in Team Developer 6.1 Report Builder, save them, and the migration process is done. So keep in mind, everything in Team Developer 6.1 is now Unicode. The data transfer is Unicode. The source code is Unicode. So if the application starts dealing with a report, that means to build up the messaging system with a report, to provide the page header, page footer, the detailed areas, and the records, and so on, then the application will pass Unicode data into the report. So if the report is not prepared for the Unicode data, maybe your report will crash, or you will see some corrupted data in your report. This is the first point to say, okay, I have to look into the report. I have to open the report in Report Builder 6.1, and I have to save it, and the process is done. So then you should be able to have a correct report at this point. Then if your application is ready to compile for Team Developer 6.1 Win32, load it into your Team Developer, compile it, and you can start with debug and test, and the migration process is done. So this is the easiest way to go to Team Developer 6.1 Win32. The next step is, if you have very old versions of Team Developer sources, make sure and keep in mind everything is now Unicode. So the best way is, again, if you have very, very old source code, use the migration wizard and load this the sources into the migration wizard, and you will get all your sources in Team Developer 6.1 for Win32. And the migration process takes care about all the strings. So all the source codes, you will see after migrating your applications, your sources, you will see that the file size of the source are doubled. So this is a good sign, because everything is now in Unicode, and the source code is Unicode. And if you start running your application in the IDE, if you start coding and so on, you can start coding in your local language if you want. So you can use Chinese characters, you can use Russian characters, and so on. So it's really native Unicode as in other development environments. Also, the data is Unicode. So again, Team Developer and Unicode, think of it. If you have parts in your software which use transfer strings like DLLs from outside, you have to look into the function calls, into parameter lists, and into the return value if there are strings inside. So if so, you have to look into the vendor of the DLLs to get the Unicode version of these DLLs. That means connect, talk to these guys, and mostly you find a DLL which supports Unicode data, and the job is done. You have to include the new DLL inside the team developer environment and look into the parameter lists, and the job is done at this point. If not, you can use team developer conversion API functions. That means then you have, if you want to pass, for example, a string into a function which doesn't support Unicode, then you have to convert the white string, the Unicode string, into the ANSI string, pass it into the DLL, and if you get something back as a string, then you have to convert it again from ANSI into Unicode. And you can use two of our API functions inside Team Developer, and the job is done at this point. But again, you're talking to a non-ANSI environment, or not Unicode environment, excuse me. And at this point, so this is definitely better to find the Unicode version of this third-party DLL. If you're dealing with Windows API calls, then it makes sense to rename the API calls from the A version of this call into a W function. That means into the white character functions. This was mentioned before from my side. If you're using Win API calls, sometimes a few customers use them inside only a functional class, so they're really in the central area of the application, and make it very simple to replace the A functions, the ANSI function, into the white character function. But sometimes they're used very heavily in every part of the application, and you have to find all these API calls to replace the A with a W. And we found out not all of our customers were aware of it, and we do it now during runtime. So our application or Win32 deployment looks into the sources during runtime. If we find a Win API call, we replace the A with a W function. So the job is done from our side, because we had a lot of problems in the past from customer side, which are talking to us after a while, application crashes and so on. It was only because calls to ANSI DLLs, ANSI C functions and so on, which are not tracked in the right way. With ActiveX, it's pretty simple. You have only to create a new wrapper API. That means you can use an ActiveX Explorer or a simple drag and drop of this ActiveX control on an empty form or dialog. Team developer at this point will create a new wrapper APL inside the Xlabs, and you can include this new wrapper APL in your application, and this job is done at this point. You don't have to change something in your source code. So the team developer takes care about the Unicode version, and you will see again the APL, the wrapper APL, will have the double size of the old one, but the job at this point is pretty easy done. With Office automation, it depends on the age of the application itself of your source code. So if you come from 4.2 or maybe from Team Developer 3, then you don't have to change so much things inside the Office automation area. But maybe sometimes you have very, very old sources and you use the first versions of Office automation, like in Team Developer 2. Then maybe you have to change some function calls, parameter lists in the calls, because Microsoft changed some structures inside Office. So, or they changed some function names, class names, and so on. At this point, you will get an error during compiling, and you have to look into the APLs, the wrappers, and so on of Office automation, of the latest version of Office automation, and then you can easily change them with a new parameter list, or to replace the right function name inside your source code. Again, supported with external calls are following parameters, data types for numeric. There's no change inside the numeric area, but if you look into the string, you will see that we have now LPW string, LPS string, LPC strings, and LP void and LPCW strings to support the Unicode version of this DLLs and the parameter list of these DLLs. You find all this information also on our web pages and white papers, how to migrate, in our academy, how to migrate existing applications to Unicode-based application. That means you will find all this including some samples and how to use them. So again, everything in Team Developer is now Unicode. The source code is Unicode, the data is Unicode, everything around Team Developer, all the tools supports Unicode. And now the question is, what's about the database? At this point, you have this choice. Team Developer Runtime converts from ANSI to Unicode and back. At this point, no coding is needed. So if you have, for example, a SQL base 9 version inside your environment, and the SQL base 9 is only based on ANSI data for strings, then you can still stay with this database. Team Developer Runtime takes care about converting the ANSI data of the database into the Unicode version inside your application and back. So all the select statements converts the ANSI into the Unicode data. If you do an update, insert, then the client will convert the data from Unicode into ANSI to store them into the database. So there's no coding needed, but you have to install the right client. So you can't stay with, let's say, SQL base 9.1 or older versions of SQL base client. You have to use the latest version of the client, which is shipped by Team Developer 6.1. And it is possible to use native Unicode inside the database. So you can use, for example, SQL base 11.6 and change the database from cars and bar cars to N cars and N bar cars to support the Unicode version of the database, of the data inside. So SQL base now supports Unicode data. Maybe it makes sense to unload the data, change the schema of the database, and load the data back. And the database will be migrated into the Unicode version of the database. If you use Oracle and other databases, feel free to convert this database into the Unicode version of the database. So the performance is around 16% better as in Team Developer 4.2. So this is a customer number. The same application was tested in TeamD 4.2 with normal ANSI data, and the application tracked all the timings and so on, and we got a nice list from this customer with different operations like fill a table, get a complete object back from a database into the application and so on, not only a simple SQL statement. And they compiled this application in Team Developer 6.1 based on a Unicode database, and the performance is around 60% better than in 4.2. Quick object limitations. At this point, quick objects are not supported on .NET. So if your plan is to have a later release on Team Developer, maybe 6.1, 6.2, or other version of Team Developer, which supports .NET, then you have to think about quick objects. So quick objects are not supported on .NET. So you have to replace them. Like if you use quick tables or quick tabs and so on, then you have to convert them into a grid or a splitter technology of the grid, or you have to convert them by quick to tab tool to convert them into the native tab control inside Team Developer. And quick reports are not supported in .NET environment. So at this point, you can compile your application to Win32, and you can ship your application to your customer. But if you plan to release later on a .NET version of your sources, then you have to replace the quick objects and some other objects inside the Team Developer environment into the native development environment of these controls. Very important thing is the data type binary. So Team Developer for .NET is really based on the .NET technology. So you have to split at this point the normal strings from the binary data. Like if you store objects like Word documents, Excel sheets, or maybe pictures like JPEGs, BMPs, and so on inside the database, then or inside an environment, and you want to load them into the application, then you have to use the data type binary, because you have to split now the database and the data from string and binary data. It was not needed in the past with Win32 because we had our own deployment at this point, and we take care about the data. But in .NET, you have to split the data. And remember, Team Developer Client translates ANSI to Unicode and back. That means if you use, for example, long string to hold an object like a JPEG, then the client tries to convert this data into the Unicode world of the data. And at this point, you will see a corrupted picture. So it's not the original picture. And this is the most problem at this point. But you can say again with the source code, you have only to change at this point the data type of this data into a binary data type. Also, you can use a SQL set long bind data type to protect a special bind variable to be converted. Like in this SQL statement, you will see that we have an into long string build. That means this data type is maybe a long string, or it is a long string at this point, and you can protect this variable to be converted into Unicode by using SQL set long bind data type. For the first parameter, this is double point ls build, and it's a type bind binary. That means the converter doesn't touch this variable to convert this variable into Unicode. And if you want to have a first shot, please insert this line into the source code and make sure that you get the right data out of the database, and you will see SQL Team Developer Environment will not touch at this point this variable, and everything should be fine. The same for saving data into the database. So if you have an insert or an update to the database, use SQL set long bind data type to protect this variable to be converted from Unicode to ANSI versions. At this point, detailed test of your new application. Does the ANSI Unicode part works well? So if you have third party inside, look into this area, debug this area if the data is really correct, not split it into parts, not cut after maybe 10 characters or so. Does ActiveX controls work well? So are you using really the right APL with the latest version of this ActiveX control? Shows all the reports the correct data. That means look into the report. If something is not looking very well, then please open again this report into Report Builder and save it again. And I'm pretty sure this was missing in the past, or you are loading something from the environment. That means the path variable is not very well set, and so on. Debugging error handling. It's always okay. That means you have to debug your application if the error handling is okay. If you get some SQL problems, like you get a message from the router that maybe the data handling is not correct, and so on, look into the database, which data type is used, do you have to protect data to be converted, and so on. And if the skinning is okay, at this point, use a useful skinning. That doesn't mean offer all the skinnings to your end user, because sometimes maybe the toolbar is a little bit, the sizing is a little bit different. Maybe sometimes it looks not very good because you had special hard-coded colors, background colors, or text colors. That means you have a black background, maybe with a dark gray text, and so on. So look into this area. And sometimes possible problems are hard-coded color settings in base classes. Like you use the base class for a combo box with an existing label and so on, and you want to reuse it, and you define a special color for background for the labels and so on. At this point, maybe you have a blue skinning inside your application. All the forms are now in a nice blue color, but you will find some labels with maybe dark gray or gray background colors. At this point, look into the base classes and set all these colors to default, and you will see the problem is gone. A few child Windows doesn't support skinning, like third-party products from maybe IST group, or if you are using other technologies from like building blocks and so on, this third-party product doesn't support skinning, so you will see the old Battleship Gray colors at this point. One very useful tool is a quick tab-to-tab executable. This replaces the quick tabs from your application and inserts the new tab control. Our new tab control is based into or split into parts. The first part is the tab control itself. This is the strip on the top of the part of the tab control and of the tab pages itself. So we replace the pagelist.apl and implement the new QTab-to-tab APL. The API is the same. You don't have to change something, but you get new possibilities, new API functions to navigate through this control. And for example, you can bind a special dialog box or form window into a special or onto a special tab page. That means you can do it during runtime. So maybe you have one or two dialog or tab pages, and you can reuse them by binding during runtime different forms and dialogs onto this tab page, and you can switch grammatically between these tab pages. Or you can create on the fly really in a dynamic way, again, new tabs and bind forms and pages and other controls onto these tab pages. So it's very powerful, gives you much more possibilities as to the old quick tab control. Some supported visual tool chest classes is, for example, the CMeter. In TT 6.2, we will have a new CMeter class to give a modern way to have a CMeter, but you will find all this information also on our web page, like which is supported, which tool chest is supported inside Team Developer for .NET. And first of all, you can use them in Win32, and you have enough time to replace them, to find a new maybe control inside Team Developer or inside the web, like a WPF control, which could be implemented into the sources to replace these old technologies with Team Developer own technology or maybe with third-party technology. Here's a list of supported standalone functions from Visual Tool Chest. You can see nearly 95–96% are supported, and we looked into some surveys from customer side, which functions are used, and we implement these functions into our framework, into our assemblies, .NET assemblies that now are available for the .NET platform. A complete list, you can find a complete list of all supported APIs and messages and so on this link. And you can go into our website unify.com into a support area, and you will find a lot of white papers and other samples, how to deal with Unicode data, how to deal with Twig objects, what you have to do to replace something, what's supported, what's not supported on .NET. But first of all, in Win32, it should work in the same way as in Team 4.2 older versions. One good point is what you have to take care about is if you want to go to .NET, you have to remove the table window split features. That means the table window could be split into or more parts, and maybe you have a detail area and you have a summary area and maybe a total section of this of the table and the data. And at this point, you have to replace this control with a new grid control, and you can use now the grid control to switch on maybe the page, the column headers. You can switch on maybe a detail area, a summary bar, and you can use different functions to summarize some columns and some data or the average and so on. So a lot of things are done by API calls, and you can use them also as a property inside the property settings. And for example, if you lose the outline list box, at this point you can replace it with a tree control, which gives you much more possibilities and much more flexibility This is really a very, very good tree control, and you can use this tree control in such application to navigate through data or navigate through the whole application. And for the tab control, for the quick tabs, you can use the new tab control, the native tab control inside Team Developer by using the quick tab to tab conversion tool. So at this point, you have only limited work to replace the splitter features. Maybe it's a little bit more to do at this point, because this is really not only one control which must be now used. You have now two controls, two grids, and maybe you have to code something around to get the same size, maybe, or if you change something in the detail area, to pass this information into the next grid to recalculate something. But it's really a doable job, and it's not very, there's no secret inside. It's really pretty simple to implement. Let's have a look first at all, before we start talking about the .NET environment, about the Team Developer 6.x architecture. So maybe on the left-hand side, you will see Team Developer 6.1 for Win32, and we use a special Team Developer class library. This library contains all the API functions, more than thousands for the moment. This is called SAL, like SAL table populate or SAL or SQL connect. So this is our own technology, and we have a Win32 compiler which creates the executable. And also we have the Team Developer execution runtime. That means this is our own deployment. So we take care about the runtime of the Team Developer environment at this point. We are dealing with the Win API calls to get forms and dialogues displayed, MDI windows displayed, to pop up maybe a message box and so on. So everything is under our control. So if something happens, like Windows brings out a new operating system, then we can look into this environment and can say, okay, we have to change maybe a Win API call. If we have a bug in our class library or in our deployment, then we can fix it at this point. With Team Developer for .NET is a little bit different. So we have again our Team Developer class library, and then we use a .NET MSIL compiler. This is a Microsoft Intermediate Language compiler. That means at this point we leave our Team Developer environment. So we are using native .NET technologies. We create a native .NET MSIL executable. And if you start this executable, the .NET framework will be loaded. And all this .NET framework calls are done at this point. So there's no dependency to any Team Developer deployment. So at this point, we have to shift, for example, 3 or 4 DLLs, .NET Assembly DLLs, which supports, for example, functions and features like table populate. And in this assemblies, we are calling .NET calls. That means we look into the framework and we do all the work in the background to get this done. If you call, for example, a SAL message box in Team Developer runtime, we have our own message box. So we display our own message box. In the .NET environment, we call the message box from the .NET framework. So we pass the information into the framework, and the framework displays this message box. So everything is now dependent on the .NET framework. And our technology is pretty simple. We have to leave Team Developer environment, and we have to use the .NET standard technology, like the WPF for the Windows Presentation Foundation and the .NET framework and so on. So this is the big difference between the Win32 architecture and the .NET architecture. So that makes sometimes life for you pretty easy, because you can still use Team Developer API calls, and we have to take care about the right calls inside the .NET framework. So sometimes you will get, if you run your application the first time, the compiler, we have some restrictions. Before I told you in Win32 everything is in our control, and we can take care about variable name. We can take care about the right usage of the variables. We can pass information into forms and so on. So it's pretty nice usage, because you don't have to talk about variable types. So in the past, you can have a loose usage of numeric types, SQL handles, window handles, file handles, and so on, because sometimes they are text sometimes they are numbers, and you can reuse them as a number variable. So at this point, the .NET compiler will throw an error, and you have to look into this environment, and maybe there's a keyword from .NET, and you have to replace this keyword. So there's no possibility to have a loose usage of numeric types. It's not possible to use DDE. I was often asked, well, you have DDE function inside your source code and your side code, and you have to take care about our old OLE and DDE stuff. But modern operating systems like Windows 7, Windows 8 will not support OLE and DDE. At this point, there's no way. You have to delete and to replace this old stuff, and you have to use the latest technology inside the source code. So there's no way around. So at this point, these are deprecated functions for us because we want to support them, but the operating system, Microsoft, doesn't support them. There's no way to implement them. And for .NET, only a small subset of low-level window messages are supported. So if a special message is not inside the .NET framework, we can't support them. Because we are bound now to the .NET framework, there's no way to implement something which is not supported in the .NET framework. If you are using dynalibs, then you can use the existing dynalibs and you can compile them in the future into the .NET assemblies. And you can use them in the same way as you did this in the Win32 environment. One point is if you have reserved keywords from intermediate language, then you will be marked as an illegal character in intermediate language compiler. So if you have something like try and catch inside your source code, you will get an error that these are keywords and you have to replace and you have to find a new name for maybe for this function or for this variable. So, and then the next very important question is, are my sources ready for .NET? So this is part of my next presentation for next end of month. And then we want to look into existing Win32 source code, what could be done, and maybe then we have to talk about how to use this upgrade report from team developer, what is inside the report, what can be done with a task editor, and how to compile the first time to .NET, what's now the right way to debug, what's the debugger behind the scene, how is now this new structure, the project structure of your source code, and what's now the difference between Win32 and the .NET framework. So again, the answer is yes, if the application can be compiled for Win32 and runs without any issue. So the first step, again, should be to bring your application to a Win32 application. And if you have problems with this Win32 application, it will not be better if you compile to .NET. So the application should run stable on Win32. All the Unicode issues should be solved by your side by replacing API calls, DLL calls, C calls, and so on. And no compiler issues should be reported as the upgrade report. So if you're an owner of the .NET compiler, if you have this add-on installed, then please run several times the upgrade report during your migration process, and you will get a list which must be, or what must be done to get your application source code ready to compile for .NET. Also, unsupported Visual Tool Chest. First of all, if you're Win32, you can stay with this old APIs and Visual Tool Chest, but you have to replace them step by step if you want to go to .NET. And okay, if you're bound to replace on third-party tools like Building Blocks and Excel, then it makes life very hard to get your application to .NET because this vendors doesn't support .NET environments for their tools. So at this point, we're really sorry. You have to stay with Win32. A migration report. Here's a small sample, only as an outlook to my next presentation, end of July. This is a sample of the upgrade report, and you will find, for example, a library name, which was hard included into my source code at this point. So at this point, my upgrade report tells me that I have to create a wrapper, and I have to use a wrapper to include this DLL. And at the end, you will see two functions which are not available on Team Developer 6.0 at this point. It's a very old version. So at this point, I have to comment them out, and my application will be able to compile to .NET. One point, if you start talking about Win32 and migration to .NET, what you can start now is using the task editor. So these are stamps inside the source code, and if you find something where you want to work after a release change or during a normal time of the release cycle, then you can mark part of your source code with task. That means do a right click on a special code line, and you will be asked to convert to task or insert the task. And we put in a stamp and a keyword called task. You can type in some commands, and we insert a timestamp. And with the command with find task inside our IDE, you can get a list with all the tasks, what you have to do, what you want to do in the future, and so on. This gives you the to-do list. And if you do a double click on a special entry of this grid, they will be placed into the source code, and you can start working on this area. Like if you find something like a quick tab and so on, mark it that you have to replace it, and you can go ahead creating Win32 applications. And if you want to go to .NET, look in your task list, and you will find a list of issues what you have to fix and have to change before you start looking into the .NET compiler environment. That is from my side. If you have any questions, please let me know, and we can start answering your questions. And also, all those presentations and a lot of information are available on our web pages, white papers. We have a lot of white papers. Please look in our academy and look to download some samples, source codes, and if you need a special feature, let us know. We can implement it very well and very quickly. Many thanks at this point.
Thank you very much, Helmut. That was very interesting. I just want to go ahead and tell you that if you need to contact us, you can write always an email to info@unify.com for more information, or go to our website at unify.com to find out more. So let us know if you need some details, if you need pricing information, if you want to do other things that we are available to help. Thank you again for attending this webinar, and thank you again, Helmut, for doing this presentation. And
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to see you all again end of July for the second part of this live webinar on moving existing applications to .NET. Thank you and bye-bye.